Welcome to another episode of Hikmatology. My name is Craig, and we have Hamza, and again our special guest, Qasim. Assalamualaikum, everyone. So I wanted to start off with a quote from Rumi. So that was quite, I found profound. I have a terrible memory, so this I found really profound. I think that's why it stuck in my mind. And then we'll kind of open up and see what you think. It's related to good and evil, and I believe it was attributed to Rumi, where he said that God says, out there, beyond ideas of good and evil, there is a garden. I will meet you there.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, so this I thought was really like coming from a Muslim sort of poet and someone who's obviously imbued with a lot of Muslim philosophy that he said this. And I wanted to know like what is he saying? Because the Quran has ideas about not exceeding the limits that are set by sort of divine law. So there is like a certain in English kind of do and don't kind of thing. So what is it he's saying that beyond you have to kind of almost go beyond these things though in order to meet Allah. So what would you take beyond that?
Mhm.
This is so interesting, by the way, because I feel like it's about comparison. It's about the
Comparison.
contrast. It's about the
Mhm.
contrast we did with, and there is no contrast in that place in a certain way.
Yeah, there's only one. Yeah,
It's
Think of
like
like a
you meet with Tawheed over there, some
there's no duality there. The duality only exists in our world, or how we look at things.
look, there was one idea, maybe it's related to this, right? So we'll put that idea of like you said, like the good and evil is like how we view things. And I want to give an idea about the Quran itself, or any divine book. Of divine, scripture, revelation, is that the revelation is for us and to help us navigate life. So I think a lot of people, like, it doesn't matter, this isn't a bash against Muslims, like every religious community has this idea that they think that, you know, the way that we kind of judge things is the way that the Almighty is
Good.
going to judge things.
Mm.
Whereas I think what we don't understand is that, when it comes to like the day of judgment, whatever that is, the final calling, the final reckoning, where we're kind of given, you know, our chances are up and accountability starts. Allah isn't going to bring out the Quran and then start judging us according to that. The Quran is for us to navigate life. Allah will judge almost like completely irrespective of holy books. The holy books are for us to try and purify and remove the rust from our hearts and get closer to God. But it's not how Allah's going to judge us. Allah has whatever Allah, I was going to use as his own, but obviously using his is problematic, but uses his own criteria. That's what Allah, the Quran itself says that he's the best of judges. So it's a higher up kind of judging. So I don't know if that's also related to our ideas of good and evil are almost like it's for us. Ultimately, when Allah judges, it's going to be like a higher judgment that we even can't comprehend. We can just do our best in this world, and then ultimately the judgment is up to Allah.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I agree with you, and I think good and even only applies if I put it in the context of Muslims. This only applies if you're walking on a path to become like a moment, or like a like a human like Rumi, you know. If you're walking like a path like that, then you have to be very mindful of your actions, because every action can lead to many other things. It's not about even good and evil. It's more like intent should be there before you move. And that's how I view it. I don't think that same lens should be applied to everybody else. And if you're trying to wake up, you can't be like, if I'm trying to wake up from this dream, and there's certain things I have to do, but I don't expect everybody to wake up. That's their role. That's their job. They're,
Mhm.
everybody's perfectly fitted in how they're living their life. And because God is, if I believe in a God, if I believe in an eternal intelligence, like universal intelligence that is operating all the time, it knows what's happening. If
Mhm.
I don't have to change it, I have to only look at myself. And yes, good and evil only applies to our lives, or if you, if that makes sense.
There's very interesting verse in Surah Shams where it like starts with Washamsi Wadduhaha. Like I guess you know what which surah I'm talking about. And it says like fa alhamaha fajuraha wa taqwaha, which is and inspired it with the wickedness and righteousness and its righteousness. Before this, Allah says, I swear on the life of us, like the humans, that Allah has inspired our souls and given us the capacity of both righteousness and evil, or sin, let's say. So this is something which is told to us by Allah that this is something very built in. But again, so we don't know what is sin, but yet there are certain things, even if you're an atheist or whosoever, lying is bad. Your consciousness will tell you that this is cheating, these things are built in, I guess, in our DNA, and it's in Quran. So of course it is built in that Allah has told us that certain things are part of human that you would know that you're not doing it right to someone else. So
Is
this
is
is
it is it
fitra, no?
is
What?
it imbalance? Do you think it's imbalance? Like everything is balance if you look at it on a grander scale. But when we shift balance in our own lives, then that's a problem. Then it's disrupts our own soul, you know?
I think personally, I don't know. I would love to hear what you think about it, Sheikh. But I think all the abilities that we have to do certain sins is so important to do many good things. But there is a limit that we exceed. Let's say, we have the ability, just like the other animals, to kill, and we do kill animals to feed ourselves. But how do we exceed that limit and kill other things, like other humans or whatever, or many other things? They could turn into a sin if they exceed a specific capacity or limit.
Mhm.
But in the first place, it's like the ecosystem that all creatures are necessary
Mhm.
for the ecosystem to run. Like the mosquito, like it's the biggest killer of humanity, but yet it's so important. If it's not there, then the whole
Yeah,
ecosystem will be disturbed.
exactly.
So the whole
You,
idea that I'm trying to say is like the
mm,
sin part that Allah has given us is a deeper blessing, if not exploited, if not contained or controlled by ourselves, and we let it grow into something that we become sinful.
So almost as if, like you're saying, if we kind of keep within the bounds. So the bounds is like an idea, it's like a Quranic idea. So if we keep within that, then we keep the balance that you were talking about. That,
mm,
it is about balance at the end of the
Yeah,
day. And balance and everything's it stays in its equilibrium and no like ups or downs or anything like that. Nothing gets disturbed. So,
yet we have to maintain the balance by ourselves.
yeah, yeah.
Everything else will stay in equilibrium, except us. We have to put effort to keep that equilibrium.
yes,
If you get what I mean.
What about
yes.
equilibrium within us then? So, you can say like, like the environmental crisis, to say the climate change. It's if we're looking at it from a religious perspective, because human beings went beyond the bounds, and rather than using the resources that we have for beneficial means, they started to like exploit it, and it became about profit, and it became about putting money and profit over things like the environment. So that's like the wider thing, the external world. What about the equilibrium? What does it mean about keeping the equilibrium inside? Because that's almost as if keeping a balance between good and evil
Mm,
within you.
mm,
But that can't be possible because you're supposed to purify the evil and get it away. So what's the equal? What's the sort of optimum position that you're supposed to hold inside? Like what should our balance look
Reminds me of a joke which I shouldn't crack, but it's like many people say you should have a halal haram ratio of 50-50, you know.
like? Maybe, maybe. Like because one idea I want to throw in is Carl Jung, the
Yeah.
psychiatry, psychology, and sort of rival to Freud, and he said that it's not about being good, it's about being whole, and it's about getting to grips with your good side, but also being comfortable and with your dark side, and not shying away from it, but confronting it. So he had the idea that as far as I understand, that certain neuroses, whatever, when you try to hide or run away from your dark side. He says, but these both, going back to the idea that within the human being, the good and the evil is inbuilt. No one's born, without this balance of good and evil within them. So what he was saying is that, the human being has to be whole, get to grips with their demons and use their demons for their own growth as much as
I
you
totally
can.
agree. This is such a interesting idea because here in the Western society, I feel like whenever the topic of death comes across, people
Mm,
just get really annoyed that they're afraid basically to talk about it because they don't want to picture it, and it's something which is a reality and a dark side of life.
mm,
Let's say that it has to end here, and to see it, to visualize it, to understand it, it's actually you have to allow yourself to see the things that you don't want to see
mm,
about yourself, and it's easier to run away from them than to stand in front of them and
mm.
look at them.
Yeah. Well, I was sort of saying, yeah. So I think it also relates to our society as well. So, like, for example, in the West, an over reliance on being nice all the time, I think is bad because it's like saying
I,
that, because it creates a hypocritical society. Because behind every smile is, is a knife that's going to stab you in the back. Whereas if you teach people to be whole, it maybe you're teaching them to be more authentic because they're more in touch with every part of their psyche. But we kind of, cheat and we always say, that these aspects of human behavior or human that are, we're not comfortable with, just put them in a closet and just pretend they're not there. But I think it creates a sort of incomplete human. And I think you have to know yourself, know your demons, know your faults, know your darkness as much as your own light, and use it both on the path to God. That will
yes.
create your wholeness, and maybe that's also related to the idea of Tawheed, oneness. It's the idea of not fracturing something, you know, like the idea of, I think there's Tawheed and there's Wahid, but both mean, I think if you collectively put them together, they mean one, but also something that you can't separate. That's not separated. It's, it's whole. And I think that, on the path is, I think we should be whole and be uniquely ourselves. And that means confronting and using our light, but also our darkness, going down into the abyss and using that to our benefit to get closer to God.
Yeah. How can we use our darkness to get closer to
Yeah,
God?
that I think it's almost as if first of all acknowledging it. Because if you have to polish yourself, well, how do you know what to polish if you keep hiding away from your own demons?
Is it more of like a forgiveness and lack of judgment for yourself and others that comes with that?
I think what it is sometimes things that we think of as bad,
Mm,
we guide them in a certain way. It can be a force for good, like a certain aggression. Sometimes,
hmm
like we don't like it in the West, like aggression is seen as a bad thing. but it can
It
be a
was
good thing.
necessary.
It can be necessary sometimes. And I think if you have that and you nurture it, I think it'll create a better psyche. Imagine if you have that and you keep constantly pushing it down because the society says that it's wrong. That's where the fractures, the neuroses come. Neuroses come when you don't, confront everything within that's going on in here.
The fact.
Yeah. So I think it's noticing that everything in the human being is there for its own good, but how it uses it and how it refines it can be the force that takes you towards God.
Can you think a human being can use it by himself, or there's a certain sort of um how should we call it? When you submit to reality, submit yourself to God, or submit yourself to my body, like the way it operates. It breathes, the heart beats, the emotions are there. And there's a sense of confliction within me that's me, that's this, these are morals, this is that. If I let it go, if I just submit to the flow of life, the emotions would be spontaneous. My thoughts will be spontaneous. My actions will be spontaneous, and it would be the right actions for that right moment and for that situation. Other than that, if you are just always measuring, thinking, it causes disruption.
You think
I
about
don't
like
know.
constantly thinking about
Yeah.
or in like a kind of Muslim language, haram,
Yeah.
halal, all the time. It can,
Mm,
and you're right because it can. I think it creates a sort of paralyze. It kind of paralyzes you sometimes, and you're kind of worried about constantly
yeah.
taking a step. For me, like I'm but OCD. So when you have that OCD and you put haram and halal into the mix, it screws it completely. You can function sometimes because you're constantly on edge. About are things pure or are you doing the right thing?
Yeah.
You're going, I did this thing. Am I going to be, struck down now because I had this thought or I had,
Mm,
and that I think that's why sometimes, like you said, this over obsession it can be harmful.
mm,
And sometimes you're going with a certain flow, but it's that balance of obviously you are told in the Quran to not overstep the bounds. But it's how do you keep it from overtaking your life? And I suppose that maybe is where you understanding, going back to the original quote that we mentioned about, beyond good and evil, there's a garden that'll meet you there. I think we get
yeah.
hooked up on halal haram, and especially like the rituals that have become part of the Muslim community, that we've kind of lost the idea that what is Sharia from? So they say that it comes from, you know, its etymology is the same root as the path that takes you to water. Okay?
Mm,
So if you think about, the prayer, the pilgrimage, and doing good, well, these are the path. The path isn't the destination. The destination is something else. But we've kind of made the rituals the destination. Stop there. I think that's what Rumi's saying is that, okay, do that, but ultimately, beyond these things, if you understand that, these things are not, performing the perfect namaz and doing everything, the Quran recitation perfect is not the point. And there's various verses in the Quran that do suggest that it's not about the ritual per se. It's about the intention. It's about, what the person when they're doing it, where are they wanting to go? So you have like two people, right, doing their prayer, salah, namaz, whatever you want to call it. But they both might be on towards a different destination. They're both doing the same thing, but they're both on a different destination. One is doing it either because, let's just say they want to show off, but they're really religious. And there's hadith about this as well and stories about this. But the other one is pure in their intentions. So you see that it's not about what you're doing. It's helpful, but it's important to understand why you're doing it and what is your destination. What is it, why you're doing what you're doing. And I think that's what Rumi is saying is that, okay, it's important, good and evil, but really when you move beyond these things, that's where you'll meet God. Is understanding that the rituals are just there to help you on a bigger horizon of becoming a more spiritual, whole human being. And
Wow.
that's where you'll find God. Maybe. Maybe.
Very interesting. I was thinking about so many things in the middle.
So
You
while
know,
I'm talking, Hamza's like, okay, this and this, okay. What
I'm
was
trying
your
to
main
connect the
take?
dots, but you know what you said, like the place beyond good and evil. And I was thinking, like, it has been said in Jannah, if you want something or you want to meet someone or you want to, like, uh, I want to see Qasim and he lives like far away or whatever, like instantly he will be in front of me or we will be meeting. It's like there is no wait or whatever. And this just makes me think, like, the dimension of that space is beyond so many things that, maybe how we converse or the ability to do all this is a part of that beyond good and evil and
Mm,
just like crazy loud thoughts. But yeah,
can I add something? I think what if you take the good and evil out of yourself, like these ideas from your own being, you will meet God there too. You don't have to actually go to Jannah to see God. That's what I think.
Hmm.
That's what I feel like you have the potential to see God within you and in other people's eyes as well and in everything if that idea of good and evil doesn't exist because you would not be measuring the world. You would be beyond it. But I guess I don't think we have to wait for the Jannah. I really don't think.
Iqbal says, the cup you were showing about love, Iqbal was saying something. It is मुझे मेरी इबादत के बस मोहब्बत दे दे. In return of my ibadat, in my praying, give me love. मैं तेरी किसी भी जन्नत का तलबगार नहीं. I'm not in need of any Jannah of yours. So, like, of course, Iqbal will get fatwas on this, and he did, I guess. But yeah,
But uh, so that's interesting what you're saying about the fatwas. So uh, again, comes into a lot of what we think is being wrong. We have centuries of like law books and hadith and madhabs and fatwas. Is maybe not 90% of it man-made, really, or even 90% of it just interpretation, you know? And by the
Exactly.
way, there's like a ton of history about what's, like good and bad and what's allowed and what's not allowed. Interestingly, I have no idea how I came across this, right? But there's the law that says that the woman's voice shouldn't be heard by someone that's not, her husband or her family members.
Mehran, yeah.
Yeah. So you think that's a Muslim law, right? That law is found word for word in Jewish books.
Mm.
That law comes from Judaism. How did Muslims end up with that law? How? There's
There are
plenty of,
many things that
yeah,
we agree on with
because,
other scriptures,
yeah, but what often, and this is one of those favorite things that certain groups that begin with a T and that are in a certain country called that begin with an A love, right? In order to, you could say, control women. But it seems a bit, I think, suspect that it's word for word, literally, what is in Jewish text. Now, one thing we have to remember is that Jewish laws were extremely pedantic and minute on their details. And one thing that we were asked in the Quran to protect us from was from those sort of laws. Don't, it's at the end of the second chapter, you know, to save yourself from the burden of those before and to save you from a burden that you can't bear. It's actually a reference to all of these laws that the Jews had because, they kept asking questions and they kept inquiring about, the best way to act, and it kept adding laws and laws and laws onto them. But that's why these laws are there. It almost seems as if certain laws, like, that would particularly stop women's movements or stop what women can do, and then also certain movements like punishments like stoning. These are not found in Islam. They're actually, they're not in the Quran. There's nothing about, at the time of the Prophet that many of these things happened. It sort of filters into hadith later. And that's the thing where a lot of what we think is good and bad is like, it's a lot of history behind it. A
Mm.
lot, we've had a lot of empires, we've had a lot of, hadith and a lot of philosophers and scholars and lawmakers that have added a lot of things to the mix. And I
Yes.
think you have to kind of unpack that and think, well, how much of it is actually man-made as well? And you really think about it. There was one guy, forgive me, I can't remember his name. He's American Muslim. He became Muslim. He wasn't born into a Muslim family, he became Muslim. And he was talking about how, and I'll maybe just end on this because I think we're going to run out of time, that when you come into Islam, you're told everything, like I said in the video, everything's halal. And you've got a lot of 5% halal, a little bit of 5% breathing space. When you look at the Quran itself, there's only 3% actually commands. The rest is all about ethics and how to deal with life and how to get, it's more about spirituality, it's about philosophy, lessons on life. Yet our obsession with good and evil is maybe when you've taken the Quran and flipped it on its head and just turned it all upside down. And it's all gone topsy-turvy the way that the prophetic message actually meant it to be was more just, it's meant to be more relaxed because the Jews had a hard time. It was meant to be more relaxed and away from that extreme laws and punishments and away for people to actually breathe. And I think that's also important to remember in good and evil that, one, Allah's merciful, and two, Allah doesn't need your deeds anyway. It's for your own benefit to grow as a human being that these things are there. You know. I think I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but anything else?
Very interesting, Sheikh. Thank you so much.
Yeah, same
Leaves
here.
me like a lot of food for thought.
Yeah, obviously, any questions, just add them in the comments. Let us know what you think. If you think we're talking sense or bonkers, you can let us know. Always open. And one thing about Islam is that we should, encourage it to be more variant and diverse opinions. Not one
Mhm.
opinion is going to be always correct, and maybe not correct for everyone, and that's fine.
For the next time, I have a super interesting topic. Just what you said, remind me of that. I wrote it down. What is absolute and who is absolute? And we'll talk about it, inshallah,
Inshallah.
soon. Yeah.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day, Sheikh. You too, Qasim.
Allah Hafiz,
Thank
guys.
you.
Allah Hafiz.
Uh,
Goodbye, everyone.